All right, what's going on, guys? This is Robin. We're here with Superman. Okay, the ending of this story is amazing. Oh my God, dude, the ending is so good. It's gonna blow you all's minds. Okay, so what this does, right? This continues the whole thing with Doomsday. A little bit of catch up here. We haven't covered it for a couple months. The overall gist of this is there are two versions of Doomsday that exist out there, right? There's the Doomsday that was trapped in hell. Yes, we covered it. Yes, it was amazing. That version of Doomsday came back and was just wreaking havoc across the city of Metropolis. And the fight between Superman and Hell's Day, if we want to call him that the time trapper appeared, the guy who exists at the end of time and has the ability to control everything. And it turns out that's what Doomsday will eventually become. And the time trapper was trying to strike a deal with Superman, but Superman wasn't really having any of it. Specifically, the terms of the deal was that Doomsday as the time trapper couldn't evolve any further. But the idea was that if Superman was willing to kill him, that it would allow Doomsday to basically evolve into the next step of evolution and effectively become one with time and space, right? To rule over everything in existence. In return for that, he would actually spare Superman the future that awaited him, which was basically an exceedingly dark place. Now, the entire plot of the current main DC Superman comic is showing us what that will become. So obviously, Doomsday wasn't like this, and this was gonna happen. Otherwise, the whole story arc gets spoiled in like 3 comic book panels. So we're still kind of seeing how all that unfolds. But what's been happening up to this point is that the forces of Calaton have been marshaling. Now, a little bit of history here, right? There was a story written by Dan Jurgens called Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey, I think is what it was called. And it was a prequel to the Death of Superman story. And what it showed was that at some point in time, Doomsday is just this unstoppable being of destruction across the universe, ended up coming across the planet Calaton. The royal family of the Calaton race ended up sacrificing their lives and merging all their essence into a being called Radiant. And Doomsday was ultimately defeated by Radiant and then effectively sent away after being believed to be dead. That's when Doomsday landed on Earth, and then everything unfolded from there with Superman's death. The important thing here is that this meeting between Superman and the Calatons is designed to basically create a kind of scenario where they're willing to take Doomsday off his hands. Now, the other thing I want to kind of remind you guys of is, yes, Lois Lane is Superwoman in the current Superman comics. That in the aftermath of everything that had gone on with the Absolute Power event, Lois Lane had just kind of come into the powers of Superman, right? Powers got switched around and they got swapped, and it's one of those little plot threads that was kind of cool. So that's why she has powers, and that's why she looks like Superman, just kind of filling that gap in. Now, the thing about this is that in the end, Superman doesn't really know how he feels about this, right? What he says is, I promised Radiant that I would stop Doomsday, and I have, right? And the response, for now, I know the killer of worlds is here and you hold him. Let us unburden you of this. Now, what he's talking about is what happened in the previous issue. Well, technically the issue before the previous issue, but the previous issue is a dinner date, right? So what happened in the previous one is that when Doomsday returned, that Superman and his forces actually ended up using the Black Mercy plant, which when it's attached to a person, it forces that person to just kind of live in a dream state. And that's where Doomsday is, right? Think of it as like a super powerful tranquilizer, enough to keep Doomsday in stasis so he can be kept hidden away until Superman and them can figure out what to do with him. So long as the plant stays attached, Doomsday stays subdued. And so that's when Lois chimes in and she says, isn't this what we just talked about? Finding a way to take care of Doomsday. And that's where this guy's like, listen to your queen, Superman, right? And he says, you and I both know it's only a matter of time before that killer escapes again and continues his murderous rampage. Can you live like that, knowing a force of death is always present? Always near. You might be able to contain him, but in the back of your mind, you will always question, what if he gets free? You will live in fear forever. And the response of Superman, and do you think that you can handle that life? And that's where he's told, right? Like, unlike you, we have nothing to lose because Doomsday took our lives from us, right? So it's very much a personal grudge. And where he says, I let my temper get the better of me, Superman's like, I can relate. And so he's simply just told, right? Think on this, Superman. The aftermath is made up of hundreds of survivors from Doomsday's attack. If you do not heed my demands, the onslaught my army will rain on your world will be unlike anything you've ever seen. We know of your power, but the destruction wrought by our duel will be cataclysmic. Now you may fight me and my army, but can you save everyone? Is even one life worth Doomsday's? Who must make the ultimate sacrifice because of your choice today? And it's a really fascinating question, right? Because Superman responds here and he's like, I think about that every day. What worries me is that Doomsday was created to be a weapon, but I never learned for what. Why did someone need a weapon like Doomsday? And he's never really given an answer here. And that's really the biggest concern for Superman, right? That when it comes to something like Doomsday, containment is the best you can hope for. Because remember, every time Doomsday dies, he comes back immune to what killed him. So he can never truly be destroyed. So if this guy's showing up on Superman's doorstep saying, give us Doomsday, and Doomsday was created to be a weapon, Superman doesn't know what they're going to do. Are they going to unleash him on the universe with the intention of just taking out everything that they possibly can? Because that could happen, especially now that you're talking about a Doomsday who's imbued with the powers of hell. It's a whole nother beast. And so all this guy says is, give me what I ask, and I promise you will never have to worry about that monster ever again. You can live the rest of your life in peace. It's the argument of Linoge, right? The storm of the century. Give me what I want, and I will go away. And so that's where Superman's like, you cannot kill him. Right? He will only be reborn and evolve stronger than before. So what will you do with him? And the statement that's made here is, we have our ways. He will be put to good use. And that's where Lois chimes in. And it's like, there it is, right? You just gave yourself away. You gave the whole thing away. And where the initial statement is to dismiss Lois, right? Well, I mean, sure, you have the powers of Superman, but this is beyond your league. You have no idea what you're talking about here, right? Maybe we should kind of keep this conversation a little above your pay grade. That the response to Superman is, nope, she knows exactly what she's talking about. Tell him what you're talking about. And that's where Lois comes in. Now, Lois as a character has always been fascinating. And when you take her as a reporter and all the things that she's reported on and kind of the Torchy Blaine elements of her character, and you throw it into a scenario like this, it becomes incredibly interesting, right? Because she says, I've interviewed royal families that date back centuries. I've interviewed hardened criminals on death row. And often the piece that becomes the most crucial, the part that I would always uncover, is what people don't tell me. And you are not telling us a lot. And so at that point, the jig is up. Right, so this guy's like, are you going to give me Doomsday, or do I have to destroy everything that you hold dear? And soldiers kind of start coming out of the shadows. Right? And at that point, Superman's like, look, I mean, you could threaten me, that's fine, I can handle it, but you don't get to threaten Metropolis, you don't get to threaten my people, you don't get to threaten my world, right? He becomes like Matthew McConaughey from The Gentleman, right? My wife, right? That whole scene, that's what Superman turns into. And ultimately, this guy's like, I'd hoped it hadn't come to this. I believed that we could be different, that we did not need violence. And that's when this guy manifests and reveals who he truly is, which is Radiant. And Radiant is ridiculously OP. Now, truth to tell, Radiant is kind of like DC's version of Silver Surfer, if we're being honest. But he's a homage to like the Surfer and then Captain Atom and people like that. He's a being made of pure energy. The fact that he was able to single-handedly defeat Doomsday is one of the things that made his character so powerful when he burst onto the scene. Now, of course, as we saw in the Hunter Prey story, that Radiant could have incinerated Doomsday after killing him. But the nature of the Calaton tradition is that a person who is killed is dressed in their ceremonial burial garb and then shot into space. Again, that's what happened with Doomsday, and that's how Doomsday ended up on Earth. But the reality is that with Radiant being here, Superman understands just how significant the threat is, because Radiant's the one to contend with. When Radiant looks like he takes off, Superman realizes right off the bat, he's going after Doomsday, right? So Superman is hot on his trail. And so at that point, Lois ends up getting a hold of Supergirl and is like, you need to get him out of here, right? You need to get Doomsday away from that place, because if Radiant attacks Doomsday and Radiant kills Doomsday, which is exactly what he would do, Doomsday's going to come back, and there's not going to be any way to stop him because he'll be immune to arguably one of the most powerful beings in the known universe in DC Comics. And so at that point, it's we have to get him somewhere. Now, the biggest issue to contend with here is where do they put him that Radiant can't get to? And how do they deal with Radiant? Because it's one thing to move Doomsday. That's cool, right? That crisis is averted. But now they've got to deal with the wrath of Radiant because he's hunting for Doomsday and he sees the Earth superheroes as being in his way. And so initially, attention turns to Lex Luthor. Now, it's one of the things to remember about the aftermath of absolute power. Lex Luthor's memories have been wiped. He has no knowledge of who he truly was before. He's just kind of figuring it all out along the way. Of course, he does have people like Lexi to help him out, and he's got his daughter to help him out, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, there really aren't a whole lot of options coming from him, which is a pretty significant loss, if we're being honest with ourselves in a situation like this, because as villainous as Lex Luthor can be, I mean, son, to have that guy on your side in a time like this with all of his mental faculties intact, yeah, that's kind of what you need. And so what he ends up getting is this brief glimpse of Brainiac. And then he's like, I have an idea. Right? And it's like, okay, like I need this, and this. And then we just kind of take a break away from him for a little bit, right? And then we focus on everything else. And so that's what's cool, is because Radiant shows up here and immediately attacks. And so it just kind of comes down to Supergirl to hold her own against Radiant as best she can until Superman shows up. Now, truth to tell, Supergirl is just not a match for Radiant, if we're being honest with ourselves. Some of that is because of the power that Radiant has, and some of that's also because Supergirl has become weaker over the years in DC Comics. She's not as powerful as she was pre-Crisis and during the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. And I would even say she's not as powerful as she was in the New 52 when she became a Red Lantern, right? The Red Daughter of Krypton. She's capable, but Superman's still top dog when it comes to all the different super people in DC Comics. So he shows up quickly and immediately starts going against Radiant. The problem is he shows up a penny shy and a gram short, because when this happens, when he arrives here, it happens right at the moment that Radiant blasts the tank that holds Doomsday. And Doomsday just goes flying out of this thing. And the Mercy plant is off him as well. So now you have like Steel and those other members of what's called the Super Corps. So basically like the secondary members of the Superman family, because again, the Superman roster has been expanded. They've taken all these people who have historically had Superman's powers over the years and just kind of brought them together in a singular cohesive family. Yes, it's amazing. And it all goes back to Philip Kennedy Johnson and the War World storyline, which was great. So the cool thing here, right, is that what you get momentarily is, given the power of Radiant and given the forces that he has at his disposal, for a brief moment, it's actually Superman and Doomsday teaming up with each other, right? Who are teaming up to face off against these guys. And it's something I never thought I would see in my life, right? A Superman Doomsday team up? Like, it's amazing. And Jimmy Olsen, ever the photographer, is taking pictures of everything. Now, here's one of the caveats, and it's kind of a under the radar plot thread that's been happening in the Superman comics for a little while here, when his rage starts to get the better of him. Now, this is Joshua Williamson planting the seeds for the fact that at some future story here in DC Comics, Superman's rage is gonna boil over. And when it does, Katie, bar the door, because I can't imagine what a pissed off Superman is gonna be like. Did I really just say Katie, bar the door? I can't imagine what a pissed off Superman is gonna be like. It's gonna be a sight to behold, and I'm here for it, bro. And so what ends up happening is, in the middle of all of this, Radiant, knowing Superman as he does, and knowing Superman being a good guy, harkens back to that question that he asked: is one life worth the life of Doomsday? And so he targets Jimmy Olsen, because it's the very distraction that Superman needs. And so Radiant fires off a shot to hit Jimmy Olsen, and time freezes, immediately freezes. And like Time Trapper Doomsday appears to Lois Lane. And it's one of the coolest things, because he says, your husband was unwilling to do what I ask. Are you, Lois Lane, can you do what is needed to save Superman's future? And so the conversation between the two is fascinating, because time's frozen this entire time, right? And literally she says, I know I can save Jimmy and Silver Banshee, right? Jimmy Olsen's girlfriend, basically. Even if I stop the one blast, Radiant could continue his attack, but I know that I can stop this. And that's where Time Trapper's like, are you trying to convince me? or are you trying to convince yourself? Now, one of the things to keep in mind here is that while this Doomsday is far more powerful than his traditional version, right? There's a difference between being, super strong and immortal and always coming back, and being able to manipulate time. How do you defeat a guy who can prevent you from being born, who can just wipe you out of existence? But Lois Lane starts to pick up on something because she's like, what do you want, Time Trapper? First, you come to my husband offering some twisted deal. He turns you down, and so now you come to me. And he says, did you know that the moment your husband took my life, the first sound I heard was not his fist cracking my skull or the sound of my body crashing to the earth. It was the sound of you, your tears, your howls of grief, and now we are here. Look around you, right? This is just the beginning of the dark future to come. There will be many more tears. But if you help me, I will give Superman a better future, a future of hope. And that's where she's like, you're not making a very convincing argument here, right? Because if my husband turned you down, there had to be a good reason for it, right? It's one of the parts of the inseparable connection between Superman and Lois. And so Doomsday continues on. He says, then consider this. I can show you the future. I can even show you the exact moment of your death. Of course you want to know. The great Lois Lane, the Inquisitor of Truth. Take my hand and I will show you everything. And she smacks it away, right? And then she just punches him. And this just kind of catches him by surprise. Do you have any clue what it is that I could do to you? And this is one of the best parts of Lois. Again, this woman's fearless, right? And she's like, you're right. I did cry when Superman died, didn't I? But those tears were not just about his death. They were because he died doing something he hated, something he never wanted to do. Take a life. You pushed him to that point. You have all this power and control over time, and yet here you are, like some kind of time-traveling devil, offering us our dreams in exchange for our souls. And that has made me realize something. You need us. So just cut the crap and do whatever it is that you're going to do. And the response to Time Trapper is, you're lost. And then he drops one of the just coldest lines that I've ever read in comics, right? He's like, I gave your husband a few extra moments before time restarted so that he could save you from Doomsday's attack. I will grant you no such mercy. Snaps his fingers, time snaps back, and the blast is heading right towards Jimmy Olsen. Now, Lois pushes him out of the way, but it's not enough to protect him from the blast himself. While he's not necessarily dead, you have Superman who just, for a split second, loses it, right? Just totally freaks. He shouts out, right? So outside of just some crazy blast, he doesn't really do a whole lot, but he catches himself. Right now, again, this is a great moment because it shows the Superman restraint is starting to break. And so that's where he kind of mutters, I can control this anger. And the response of Radiant, then direct it where it should be, Superman. The centuries of pain and ruin caused by Doomsday. Open your eyes to the truth so that you may finally see what that monster is. Doomsday, you have taken so much from me and so many others. No more, and goes on the attack. And then at that point, the Time Trapper just reappears. Now Superman comes after him, right? He goes after Time Trapper Doomsday, and that's where Time Trapper's like, yes, right, give me your rage, beat me to death, end me, kill me, so that I can be reborn as something new. And then ultimately, he holds off. And so in that moment, when the fight's going on between Doomsday and Radiant, you have Time Trapper Doomsday and Superman, you switch back to Lex Luthor. And he's like, okay, I almost have it, a way to put a stop to all of this. It's risky, but it's the only real choice that we have. And he says, Lena, help me find a suit. And so in the midst of this whole battle, as all this chaos and pandemonium is going, everyone's rapidly coming to this realization, this can't keep going on, because if it does, it's going to lay waste to the city of Metropolis. So many people are going to get caught in the collateral damage, and so many people are going to die. And so what ends up happening is that whilst literally Superwoman Lois is trying to protect some people, a voice comes out of nowhere and says, I have a plan, Superwoman. We need to get Doomsday, Radiant, and his army into the sky and away from any civilians. now. And that's where they literally just kind of lead all of Radiant and his forces on the chase. And Radiant follows. Being as predictable as he is, he follows. And like Doomsday won't die. And the whole time, Time Trappers just like, remember Superwoman, this is only the beginning. Time is on my side. I tried to warn you. And so Lex Luthor fires off this massive energy blast from the biggest gun I've ever seen. And guess what he does? He shrinks everybody down. He takes a page out of Brainiac. He shrinks them all down and puts them in a bottle. The forces of Radiant, Doomsday, the whole 9 yards. He's like, if Brainiac's bottles can hold Katonians and Zarnians, they can hold Doomsday. The problem is this. Keep in mind, time in the bottles is relative to time in the real world. And so initially Lex is kind of celebrating this achievement. And the response of like Superman and all those guys is like, this is a really, really bad idea. This is a really terrible idea. And the question is why? And it's like, because Radiant and Doomsday are going to be fighting in that bottle for quite some time. They're going to be killing each other over and over and over again. So sure, right? We've got them out of the way for right now, but what happens when that bottle is broken for one reason or another? What happens when Doomsday gets out? How far more evolved is he going to be than he is right now? And so with Jimmy Olsen recovering from his injuries, for the most part, Lois can't really bring herself there, right? She really can't take herself to see Jimmy. And this is Joshua Williamson kind of setting the stage for Lois basically gaining her own arch enemy in the sense that like Silver Banshee blames her for the injuries of Jimmy Olsen. And so it's like, you know, you have an arch enemy here, which in truth, I'm kind of excited to see where that goes. But here's the ending. Here's the ending. And none of you see it coming. None of you are going to guess what happens with this ending, right? So initially it focuses on Zod. That's not the ending. Zod is not the ending that I'm talking about here, but it does focus on Zod, right? General Zod being so far away from the sun that basically he's starting to lose his powers and no one can know that he's losing his powers. And he kills the only guy who knows that he's losing his powers. So basically it's Joshua Williamson saying like they're bringing in, you know, the whole thing of General Zod into the Superman comics. Here's a crazy thing. You go to the end of time, right? And you pick up with Time Trapper Doomsday, right? And he's just kind of musing and talking, right? Superman, come to me, you were right. Even your past self refused my offer. Don't any of you know what is at stake? Time is not written in stone here. We can still change it. You will see how much worse things get once Darkseid returns and then come crawling to me for help. But in the midst of this, there's this crack of thunder and these people appear out of nowhere. And like Time Trapper recognizes them, right? He's just like anybody but you, right? I would rather it be anybody but you. And that's where they just say, you messed up, Time Trapper. You tried to work with the wrong side. We will give you what you want, but first I will rip from your mind everything you know about this Superman. Now, the question you're probably asking yourself is, who are these guys? Well, ladies and gentlemen, DC is secretly setting up for a crossover event this summer because these guys are not from the main DC universe. Son. This is the Legion from the absolute universe in DC Comics. We're looking at a crossover, son. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. I am so hyped. An absolute universe crossover with the main DC universe. Son. It's going to be next level. I'm so excited. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.